Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Treasurer. I, too, want to talk a little bit about the pension. While we have you in front of us, you're someone that's got your finger on the pulse of markets, on market spreads, on market earnings every day, and it's your expertise. We talked a little bit about the different pools of employees that we have. We've got, future hires. We talked about defined contribution plans and those changes. We talked about those in the plan and making changes to the plan. Obviously, the governor's proposal does not touch retirees in any way. But we know we have an unfunded liability associated with those retirees. So I guess the question is, how do we tackle the large unfunded liability? That it's large no matter what. If these are maybe even tweaks, but how do we tackle that large unfunded liability? Is there a golden egg? I mean, you said it's a complex problem. We all understand that. Is there a golden egg or pieces that we can do to make this thing better in the future? And
I think you've nailed it in even the framing of the question. Sometimes just framing a question constructively is part of addressing a problem. There is no golden egg. There are pieces. Let's start with that, just to pick up on what you're saying. Second, I think intuitively you're understanding it's one thing to say, don't worry, we're not going to touch seniors who are already retired. That can be true, but we also have no funds available to pay them in 3 years, 8 years, or 12 years. Pick your number, because we're collapsing forward. We're giving ourselves yet another contribution holiday. It's very irresponsible treatment of current retirees, and very, very tough on existing employees who are saying, okay, I'm essentially being asked or informed to take a little bit of a cut in my future retirement, with less assurance that this thing will be fully funded. And understand, too, we understand capital markets and human capital. People do move across city line to avoid the city wage tax in Greater Philadelphia. They do move out of Allegheny County, to avoid certain taxes, et cetera. If you get to a point where you turn this into a pay-as-you-go plan and you say, don't worry, we've held seniors harmless, you may get capital flight of high earners in all the perimeters of the state, from Erie down to southwestern PA, right through along lower south central into southeastern PA, up into Lehigh Valley, up into Pike County. People just saying, holy moly, if they're going to double the wage tax in 1 year because they just have to because they owe all these annuitants, you could have a bigger problem by far than you have today. The problem you have today is partially created by a misguided, in my view, pledge. First, you have to say, pay your bills. Then you come to the real leaders of the appropriations and financing process and you go, here seem to be the essential bills we got to pay. How can I reduce the size of those bills? How can I behave in a fiscally responsible fashion? Over time, I think you got some demonstration from thoughtful leaders in labor unions that they're willing to work with you, but they need to have some, for example, I don't think anybody is worrying about paying top tier benefits to the top affluent people in the future. There's a lot of very reasonable things that can be done. Pieces of the puzzle. This is not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. I was very encouraged by the pension reform of 2010, Act 120's use of an approach that involved variable risk. I've seen people in the Taft-Hartley movement who are innovators saying we can do something that includes variable risk and risk sharing. To couple that with a much lower normal cost, the normal cost of 2.24%, it starts to say, you're talking about spending billions of dollars to avoid some future risk, and those billions are going to be due to you very soon. So I would say embrace variable risk in lieu of this kind of religious talking point of a 401k. I just think it's flat out less expensive, and you can get some cooperation. Then another piece of the puzzle, I think, probably will end up being constructive use of bonds, whether they're pension obligation bonds or something else. I was one of the very few, and frankly I was told by career elected officials, don't talk about this, but I said, it's my responsibility. I won this office in the middle of that real crash, the downturn of '08. I talked to 50 different people, and they said, that liability, that pension liability is real. That's just off-balance sheet debt. Every dollar of unfunded liability you have, you're implicitly paying your actuarial assumption on that. And you owe that. And, so what I would do is I'd go out and borrow as much as I can at 3.5%. And the other thing that'll happen, and when I'm quoting others when I say that, I'm not saying borrow as much as you can. Maybe it's $9 billion. I've talked with people off the record, people you know well, about numbers like this. But one of the models I used in 2009, I came into office in the first quarter, I said there will be a rebound in exposure to these equity markets. You see Illinois, a smaller state, borrowing $10 billion to do the wrong thing, just to pay the benefits that year. Instead, if we took $10 billion and reinvested it in PSERS and SERS, I think you can double your money before I leave office and pay your interest. The Dow went from 6-something to 14,000 something. Now, I don't want to be overly hand-wavy, but the data's in. If we'd done this 4 years ago, I was right. Now, I'm not sitting here saying I have a crystal ball, but my guess is that as you look at this problem, you are going to end up saying there is a prudent and responsible way to use debt, because we're taking a debt that really exists already and restructuring it and pulling down its cost, which is exactly what was done, to your good point, in the private sector in terms of balance sheets.
There is no doubt with the rates where they are that the professionals like yourself are saying, hey, look, this is off-balance sheet debt. Put it on the balance sheet because it is real. I mean, it may be off-balance sheet, but is it a real debt? It is a known debt, and there's no way you're getting away from it. Put it on the balance sheet at 3.5%, a wonderful rate, and move ahead. So I was just wondering your opinions. I
want to hasten that. That's
thoughts.
only a piece. It's only a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
It isn't. You can get it wrong. Usually, cities get it wrong. They wait until their hair's on fire, then they put it out with a hammer. So you want to be prudent about doing this. You want to make sure you have prudent professionals diversifying this. But part of what I'm saying is, please don't let the budget office get away with short-sheeting the employer contribution. If they want to prudently use debt for some of that contribution and to respect the current collar, I think there should be bipartisan conversation about that. But as soon as you pull back that employer contribution, you've given relief to the people who are graded only on letting you folks out of here by the beginning of the summer with certain talking points. You have increased your total liability, and you have increased the cost per benefit dollar paid to senior citizens. So in terms of efficiency, you've decreased efficiency if you allow the budget office to take another holiday.
The number you threw out there, I think, was what, 10 billion or 9 billion. I mean, is that any specific number? How do you come up with that number? It was
based on a review of the literature that we were doing. In all candor, I know darn well me waving my arms and saying here's a McCord solution is a sure way to get it shot to death. I mean, I'm not going to say here's one proposal, but I've had a lot of good constructive conversations on a bipartisan basis. Sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree with really smart people like Senator Pat Brown and Representative Grell, in addition, of course, to my chairman, Chairman Markozik. And we sit around and we do models and we ask questions like, what's a prudent amount? And there, one of the ways to think about this is there is no way that you're escaping more than X billion dollars of this liability. No matter what you do to that calculator, here's an amount, and here's our assumption surrounding that. So that was part of what we did. Plus, we're very mindful of the ratings agencies. The ratings agencies, as I forecast 5 years ago, are starting to take this off-balance sheet debt as well as our neglect of maintenance. Investing in deferred maintenance of water systems and highways, and they're writing down our debt. They are not going to let us borrow this money to just send it out in annuity payments. But if they said, you're borrowing a prudent amount of money, you're allocating it in an efficient fashion. This is a very prudent way to be addressing this. Plus, you are going through the very real pain of paying your bills. So I don't think you just borrow your way out of this problem. We've already borrowed this money. We just can restructure the debt a little bit, is what I'm really suggesting. And by we, I mean none of us in this room, for the most part. People did this before our watch. But also, there is a pain point of actually honoring the collars that exist. I actually think the Appropriations Committee, on a bipartisan basis, does a huge public service by saying, we can talk about pension reform, but let's not talk about it in the context of breaking these collars. A final point I'll make that I think is very much of a bipartisan point, and Representative Grell can correct me when he gets back from out of the country here, but one of the things that's very difficult for very well-run public school systems is honoring the collar, figuring out some way, perhaps allowing some deposit of debt that would allow them to not just take it out of tax revenue. Think about this. If you have a budget negotiation where somebody says, for my budget, the state budget, find me $175 million, or I'm going to go after, for example, K through 12 funding. Think about the cuts they're already going through. They already have stakeholders who are saying, gee, we need to fund the pension, but we also don't want to see headcount cut to a point. They already are feeling that pain. So I think you've got a lot of people starting to pass the reasonable person test, and all reasonable people are saying there are multiple pieces of this puzzle. It's not as simple as we thought, and it will involve some pain to do the right thing, which ultimately is to help and protect senior citizens who've earned these benefits and who spend more than 97% of the money inside the borders of Pennsylvania.
I think you make a great point with the ratings agencies. It's something that we don't think about too often, but obviously they're pulling in this off-balance sheet debt as part of their calculation of our ratings, which, it's being factored in already. So
right.
Thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Thank you.